So we started last week the mitzvah of Kriya V'Reviyah, which means to be fruitful and multiply. And we said that the Tzemach Tzedek asks two questions. One is, why does the neshama need to come down into a physical body in the first place? And since it's already down here, why is it that it needs to be fruitful and multiply? Why can't it just stay the way it was? Like one person. Adam Rishon. Could have stayed Adam Rishon and Chava, and that's it. What's this idea that suddenly you have to have more? So the first question that we asked is why the neshama comes down. So we saw that when things are spiritual, so they are limited, which is the surprising thing. That something that's spiritual, in the end, is limited. Why is it limited? So we started getting into the answer last week. We said that when something is spiritual, we see that there are limits of understanding based on how much a person knows. So how much he can enter into the inyan, how much he can understand the pnimius of it. But it's limited, it's not forever. Whereas, when it comes to performing a physical mitzvah, if I'm learning Torah, there's a limit to how much I can know. But if I'm performing a physical mitzvah, the Ein Sof reveals itself. How is that? It sounds to be the opposite. When you're doing a mitzvah, it seems to be that you're doing something that's completely temporal. It's limited in time, it's limited in scope. There are certain times you can do it, certain ways that you can do it. But we said that the big difference is that when you do a mitzvah, anybody who does the mitzvah is still the same mitzvah. Somehow it encompasses everybody the same way. Meaning it tears down borders in a way that the spiritual can't. Let's explain a little bit more, because maybe last week it wasn't completely understood. If I want to explain something to a student, okay, so in the end there's a limit to how much he can understand. Sometimes he'll understand more, sometimes less, but I can't make it that he and I are the same thing altogether. I can't do it. There's no way I can reach that level. The best teacher in the world, in the end, cannot transfer all of his knowledge. Because that's how the spiritual is. There's some limit to it. And the limit comes out because of what level each person is at. So what we see is that there's gradations, meaning limit. Sometimes you think about limit as being, you can't go beyond here. But another way of thinking about limit is that there are levels that differentiate. It's another way of thinking about limits. That a limit says, ad kan v'lo yoter. Like this is as far as you can reach, and you can't. And somebody else maybe can reach more, but you can't reach more than that. There are levels. Let's think about it this way. There are steps behind you. So if you look at the steps are an example of limit. Why? Because they take a gap between the second floor and the first floor, and they divide it up into separate steps. That's also called limiting. Limiting is like you're taking something that was originally had maybe an infinite number of levels possible, and you decide that you cut it up in some way. And you can't cut it up forever. There's always some kind of gap that you have to make between the different levels. So there's gradations, meaning that if I'm standing on the fifth step, I'm not standing on the first step. Somebody else is there, and I'm up here. There's a difference between us. So we feel that we are limited, meaning that we can't all be in the same space at the same time. But the amazing thing about a mitzvah is that it's infinite. How is it infinite? That every single person who does the mitzvah, it doesn't matter how much they understand or don't understand, the actual act reveals the same thing. It's all the same act across the board. Everybody's in the same place, as it were. So somehow, space is suddenly opened up, and all of us fit into it. We don't know how, but we're all there. Bring as many people as you want. We're going to do the mitzvah. It's still the same mitzvah. It didn't change. Okay? But in understanding, there's always different levels of it. Cuts us up, it divides between us, and it creates a limit in between the different stages of it, or different levels that people are holding by. Yeah.
What about someone that has a kavanah versus somebody that doesn't?
Right.
So when someone's doing it with
So the kavanah is the spiritual, it's not the physical. I don't need a kavanah in order to do the mitzvah. And even if I have kavanah, it still doesn't change the mitzvah. Even if I say that you need kavanah, and by kavanah we mean intent, meaning that I have intent to tavel in the mikvah. I didn't mean to fall into it in order to take a swim. I meant to tavel. The moment that you have the intent, it's all the same across the board. So the famous example that's brought in Chassidus is that Moshe Rabbeinu puts on tefillin, we put on tefillin, it's the same tefillin. Regardless of the fact that there's no question that Moshe Rabbeinu is on a completely different level than we are. And obviously he knows more about the tefillin than we do. And yet somehow, regardless of whether you're great or small, the mitzvah is the great equalizer. Physical space is the great equalizer. The physical world equalizes everything, makes everything the same. It's one of the things that's also disturbing, because we live in a physical world. And so what's the difference between a Jew and a non-Jew? In the physical world, there's no difference. The gufot, the bodies, are exactly the same. This is not just a Hasidic question. This is a halachic question. It's a very halachic question. If the bodies are the same or not, what would be an example? So let's say there's a certain drug that a gynecologist would give, and it causes some kind of bleeding.
Some kind of what?
Some kind of bleeding, some kind of... because it causes something. So you come to the Rav and you say, I saw something. And he asks, so are you taking a drug? He says, yes, I'm taking this and this. So you don't have to go and test it on Jewish women. It's the same thing if you test it on if the FDA says this is the side effect. You don't have to go and look for Jewish bodies to ask the question about whether this causes so-and-so. Because all the bodies are considered the same. It's a great equalizer, time and space. It makes everything equal, in that sense opening up a level of infinity that's completely different than the usual infinity we think about. We usually think about infinity, that there are many, 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 many levels. That dafka is in the spiritual, not in the physical. It's a different type of infinity. It's not the infinity that we're looking for. We'll see why in a moment. But the infinity that the body opens up for the neshama is that suddenly I can access something that's far beyond my capabilities. So the moment I do a mitzvah, the mitzvah itself is infinite. Why? Because it doesn't matter what level you are, you're still performing the same mitzvah. It's called shaveh mashveh katon v'gadol. It makes the great and the small equal. It's a different concept than the way you think about it. Usually you want to say there's no limits in the sense that you can go on forever. The idea here is that regardless of who you are, you still perform it the same way. You still do it the same way. It's equalizing everybody. It's making everybody the same. This has another name, which is what we're going to get into today, and that's called the Sovev. So in Chabad, this becomes a big deal. It's usually quoted, the main mimer that talks about this, especially in relation to here, he almost quotes it word for word from what he wrote there, is in the Likutei Torah. If anybody wants to look, it's in Parashat Behar. And it's called the Chaptotai Tishmoru. That's the Dibur Maschil. And there he discusses almost everything he's going to discuss here. He almost quotes it word for word from what he says there. And what he's going to explain to us is the difference between Sovev and Memaleh as Sovev, meaning the surrounding, the circle, being a symbol for infinity. And you understand also that the circle is kind of strange to call it infinity. Why would you call a circle infinity? Circle is very nicely bound, right? The moment you have a circle, you've bound a certain area, and it looks limited. But that's not what we're looking at. We're looking at the fact that whether you're on top or you're on the bottom, it makes no difference, because there is no real top or bottom in a circle. That's what the circle is symbolizing. It's not symbolizing infinity in terms of space. It's symbolizing infinity in a way that you can't tell the difference between top and bottom. It so takes away the concept of limit that there's no longer something that's high and something that's low. Whereas when you talk about limits, the first thing that you have is, well, this is closer, this is further, and so on, all these things. That's what limits does. That's what we said about the stairs. You're on the fifth rung, it's different than if you're on the 10th rung. You're in a different place altogether. Those are limits. So the other concept is what we call memale kol almin. Memale kol almin means the light that fills all worlds, Hashem's light that fills the world. And there, it's dafka ruchni. It's much more spiritual. And the whole concept behind it is a line. And a line, by necessity, has a top and a bottom. As opposed to the circle, where you can't say what's the top and what's the bottom. Even if you decide on a reference point in the circle, it doesn't help. Because it's round, you can see it just turning around. It's actually the first mimer that the Alter Rebbe heard from the Magid was a mimer that's very similar to this. It's one of the first ones that's always learned. It's called Marehem u'Maasehim, Ka'ufan betoch ha'ufan. And it talks about why the symbol used in Kabbalah for the worlds is a circle. And it's not saying, again, we have this concept today that the globe is, the earth is a globe, so we think that we're talking about the physical shape. But that's not the point. The fact that it happens to be physical is very nice. But, that physically the earth happens to be a globe is very nice, but it's not why the Arizal, why the Kabbalah chose the symbol of a circle. It chose the circle because symbolically the circle tells you that there's no top and bottom. There's no left or right. None of these things exist, and therefore it equalizes everything. Every point on the circle is equal to every other point. There's a famous medrash that shows up a number of times in the Shas, that in the future Hashem will make a circle for the tzaddikim. What does it mean that he makes a circle for them? That they dance around him. All the tzaddikim, meaning all the souls of the Jewish people, they dance around Hashem like in a circle. And they point at him and say, so the question is, why are they all standing in the circle? Well, why not each person based on his level? One's here and one's there. To tell you that in the end, even though it's true that when you look at them spiritually from our point of view, there's one who's greater and one who's smaller. But from Hashem's point of view, the great equalizer, Hashem who is infinite, and therefore everything is equal before him, so it doesn't matter what a great tzaddik you were or what a little tzaddik you were. In the end, everybody is the same distance from the center. So this is a big chiddush, by the way, that I haven't seen it proven otherwise, but this is a masoros that's gone on for a few hundred years, that the Baal Shem Tov was the first one to have people dance in the circle. That the Arizal, the closest thing that he came was that they did a kafos, but they didn't dance in a circle, they didn't hold hands, but rather it was just like you walk around in a circle. But to hold hands and to dance around like that, there was a chiddush of Chassidus. That there's this concept that before Hashem we're all equal. It's all the same. That is the true infinity. I'll give another example to try to capture this. If you look at the sun and you say what's further out, the Earth or Jupiter? Okay. So Jupiter is twice as far away as the Earth, maybe even more than 2 times. So it's a very big distance. So you would say the Earth is closer to the sun and Jupiter is further away. If somebody would tell you, look, I'm going from the sun to the Earth, I'm going from the sun to Jupiter, those are two completely different, you got to get 2 different types of spaceship, I guess. It's 2 different journeys altogether. But if you're measuring the distance from the Andromeda galaxy to the Earth or to Jupiter, it doesn't matter. The distance is 2 million light years. So whether you add whatever that little thing that's added between the Earth and Jupiter, whatever it is, makes no difference when you have something that great or that far away. So if the center of the circle is so far away, it doesn't matter if the point is the Earth or it's minuscule. I mean, it makes no difference. The same thing with Hashem, that if you want to reveal Hashem's greatness, it has to be something that causes everybody to be equal. Otherwise, you haven't revealed his infinity. You haven't revealed how far away he is from all the concepts that we have. So let's take this to the other direction. That whenever we talk about a tzaddik who understands this much, a Talmid Chacham who knows this much or knows that much, we're not talking about the aspect of Hashem that's infinite. We're talking about the aspect of Hashem that's finite. That one person's Jupiter and the other person's the earth. Because they have different levels of understanding. But truly, Hashem is not the sun, he's Andromeda, he's so far away that whether you're the earth or you're Jupiter really doesn't make any difference. Where does this show up? It doesn't show up in learning Torah. It doesn't show up in spirituality, because in spirituality we see the difference between people. We see that there's one person who understands more and then there's one person who understands this. We see spiritual levels between people. We know ourselves that we move and we change and so on. But when it comes to the performance of a mitzvah, the actual mitzvah, it's the great equalizer. Here, everybody suddenly becomes the same. And because everybody became the same, that's an illustration that the mitzvah is relating to Hashem as really being infinitely far away, or to his infinite aspect, because there's no difference between the different people performing the mitzvah. I know at the beginning it's hard to get it, because we think about mitzvahs as, we're so used to thinking about kavanah and mitzvah as such an integral part, but it's not an integral part. It's what we add to it. I'm not saying that you shouldn't have it, you should have it. But the mitzvah itself is just the physical act that the person does. And the moment that, this famous thing that the Baal Shem Tov, to demonstrate this, he used to have a sukkah when he first came to Mezhibush. So he had a sukkah that had all the questions in the world, all the shilas that he could probably have about a sukkah. And he did it on purpose. They say he did this on purpose. Why? Because he said, I want to have the sukkah that's the most questionable but still kosher, so that if there's any Jew who doesn't know how to do something, and he doesn't know exactly if this is that, he'll always say, well, it's probably at least as good as the Baal Shem Tov's. And if it's for the Baal Shem Tov, it's good enough. For me, it's good enough. And that's a tremendous idea, that not to differentiate. Again, there's also there's something called the hiddur and so on. But in the letter of the mitzvah, everything becomes equal. In the moment that you're yoytze, that's it. There's no levels after that. The moment you perform the mitzvah, you performed it. So
what about a better etrog and a worse etrog?
That's hiddur.
That's
the
hiddur.
hiddur.
No, I know. It's funny, we were talking about that on Shabbos.
Okay. So there's also something called hiddur, and hiddur is already, it's revealing something entirely different. It's revealing the beauty, and beauty already is something it's a spiritual concept. That already has something to do with the kav, has to do with the line. With levels of beauty, you can make it greater and greater, more and more beautiful.
It's like the Kabbalah.
Yeah, okay, that's like the kavanah. Okay. You say that the whole idea of kavanahs, in the end, it comes from hiddur. Okay, so the purpose of the neshama coming down is that when the neshama was only spiritual, didn't have a physical body, could not perform physical mitzvahs, it could not connect to Hashem's aspect that's truly infinite. So even though, as a neshama, you can go michayil el chayil, it's called, you keep learning more and more, even more in depth, as much as you advance, it's never infinite. Even if we said last time, this is like Zeno's famous paradox, that if there's really an infinite number of points between A and B, so you can never get from A to B, okay? Because you have to go through all the points. And even if it takes an infinitesimally small amount of time to go from every point to every point, there's an infinite number of them, it'll still take an infinite amount of time. That was his famous paradox. So in the end, if you want to get from A to B, you have to jump. You somehow have to make a leap. And that was one of the proofs, by the way, that we still hold by it today, in many ways, that space is also quantified. That space is not continuous. This is a whole big question in physics today, but the bottom line is there's more reason to say that space, like energy, comes in packets. And it's not continuous. You don't really have an infinite number of points because Zeno's paradox is very, very strong. Even there, there's also other considerations which probably not a good idea to get into here because I don't understand them so well anyway. Okay, so the neshama has to come down in order to taste from this great equalizer called the body, that everything is the same by everybody. The mitzvah you do, the tzitzis is tzitzis. The candles that you light, or the candles that you light, it's the same by everybody. And it's only once it is able to do a mitzvah here can it relate to the infinite aspect of Hashem. So that the neshama gains by coming down here. Now he's going to add something more about this. He's going to add that what is the nature of a mitzvah? What exactly does the mitzvah do that it reveals something? Because it got to be doing something. He's going to say at the end, he already said part of it, that we don't yet see the revelation from it, but we can understand what it's doing. All the mitzvahs do one thing. This is a famous statement from the Maggid, that Hashem created the world by making the ayin into yesh, making the nothingness into somethingness. And we talked about tzaddikim, but it's amech kulam tzaddikim. Every mitzvah that we do is like a tzaddik, because they're all the same. So when we perform a mitzvah, we're making the yesh back into ayin. We're taking something that exists and turning it back into the ayin. And that's the whole idea of connecting to the infinite. So there must be something in the mitzvah that they're all the same, that they're turning something that exists into something that doesn't exist. So that's the question, what is it? So it's not so hard to understand. What is a mitzvah doing? Nobody would put tefillin on because of a logical reason. Nobody would keep Shabbos the way that we keep it because of some logical reason. So we're giving up something. We're taking something that we have and we're forfeiting it in order to perform a mitzvah. What are we forfeiting? So it could be that we're forfeiting, somebody would say, our mind. Why would you do this? It makes no sense. So I'm forfeiting my rationality. That's one possibility. But even more than that, all the mitzvahs that we perform, we're forfeiting our will. Meaning we're nullifying our will. I would rather be doing something else. And yet, Hashem told me to do so and so. So every single time that I do a mitzvah, I'm transforming something that exists, which is my will, I'm transforming into something that is nullified, something that doesn't exist. And that transformation, every time that I do it, is called an aliyah. It's called an elevation. And this we have to understand why. So this is the part that I think we're going to come to now. So this is from the bottom of page 2. Let me just four lines up. Perush, so even one more, because I want the pasuk. Uchedichtiv, 5 lines up from the paragraph on page 2. וכדכתיב לכל תכלה ראיתי קץ רחבה מצוותך מאוד, פירוש לכל מיני כלות הנפש ותענוג הנשמות מהשגתם באלוקות בגן עדן יש קץ וגבול, שעד כאן מגיע השגתה. So, as much as the neshama can understand when it's not in a body, there is an end to its understanding. An end here means that even if you did an infinite number of levels, you would still not get to infinity. It doesn't matter how much you would get. Ad kan migia sagata. All the more so that we know that each neshama is limited in how much it can understand. The example that we had last week, that I guess who said that it bothered them that they wouldn't know mathematics. If you don't know mathematics now, you probably won't know it in the world to come, meaning in the world of neshamas. If you don't have a knack for it here at some level, you don't suddenly get it from being outside the body. Because actually it's easier to learn it here than just to learn it there. But what you did learn here, what you do have a knack for, what you do have talents for in this world, when the neshama departs the body, you deepen and deepen your understanding in those things. That's why it's very important for a person to learn where his heart feels good. Because if you're going to be, even if you force yourself to do things that you don't understand fully, if you don't really understand them, you might not enjoy them in the world to come either, because it won't be revealed to you, because it's not your thing. So every person has to know and invest in what they understand. Invest a lot, as much as they can. Still have a mitzvah to know all of halacha, and that I need to know by heart. But it doesn't mean that if I'm not very good at family relations, that the Yevamos should be my main maseches. Some people chop it right away. Some people don't chop it as much as they think. Because his uncle once removed from that doesn't work. Probably won't work in the world to come either. Meaning, I'm talking about the world of neshamas, the world of souls. So as much as you advance, there's a limit. ולא יותר. אבל רחבה מצוותך לקבל בגילוי אלוקות בבחינת אין סוף ובלי תכלית. But the mitzvah is a vessel for the infinite. It's able to contain the revelation of Hashem's infinite aspect. שזהו פירוש מאוד. That's what it means, רחבה מצוותך מאוד, without end. שעניינו מורה על בלתי הגבלה ושיעור, כמו שמבואר באיגרת הקודש, סימן י"ז. And this he explains in the Tanya at length, everything that we just tried to condense in a few minutes. Okay. וביאור הדברים יובן על פי מאמר הז"ל בכאהבה יצור עולמים. So now, in order to understand this difference between the spiritual and the physical, between the finite and the infinite, so we have to add something new. And this whole statement really comes from the Zohar, but the Zohar here is basing it on this famous pasuk, Bekahava Yatzur Olamim, Yud Kei. So Yud Kei Havaya is the former of worlds. He forms worlds. With what? With the two letters Yud and Kei. And the Chazal say, B'Yud Nivra Olam Haba. This is a very interesting concept. The world to come, which world to come are we talking about? It's not so clear from Chazal. You always have to ask, are they talking about the world of souls, or are they talking about the world to come, the world after the resurrection, after Tchias HaMeisim? Which one are they talking about? So it's not clear in the beginning. Behei nivra olam hazeh, that this world was created with a hey, that seems to be understood. Pirush. Ki mudad zot she'en sof baruch hu sovev kol amim u'meleh kol amin. So now it says the Zohar's language for this, that Hashem is both the surrounder of all worlds and the permeator, the one who fills all worlds. And again, this is not talking about spatially. The hardest thing in Chazal, especially in Kabbalistic or Medrash type of language, is to stop thinking literally and to figure out what in the world are they trying to symbolize. Because the biggest problem that we have today in this generation, in my opinion, is with Chazal science. And people read their science and they say, how can you say the Chazal knew everything? They didn't know the simplest things in the world. Or people do the opposite. They say, oh, look at how smart Chazal, oh, look at the science. They knew more than we know today. Chazal are not scientists. We have to come to that conclusion. They did not spend their years in observatories observing the sun and the moon and taking measurements. They didn't spend their time in a chemistry lab. They did very little of these things at all. They built, like we do today, any serious posek is not a scientist. I mean, there are a few that are both and both, but they're usually not the top tier. The top tier is a person, you can't be top tier without dedicating your entire life just to the Torah, just to the Nigla. So you have to take the scientist's word for it, that this is what they see. And in every generation, it's the same way. We take their word for it. But as opposed to the scientists who believe they've found the meaning of the life, the universe, and everything, we don't believe that. We say we know that our understanding of nature changes from generation to generation. And just as much as you today think you know everything, they thought that way 1,000 years ago also. And guess what? 2,000 years ago they thought the same thing, and 3,000 years ago they thought the same thing, and so on. And science changes every about millennium. It changes its whole perspective on the universe. So we accept it because this is how we look at it right now, but we don't think that this is etched in stone. We think that this is a stage. What do we do? Why do we accept it? Because we need, when we explain something, we need some kind of language to talk to people. So if everybody today knows that there's something called an electron is a good example for what an ofan is, for instance, or whatever, what Yechezkel, Ezekiel is talking about in his Merkava. So it's a good example. If that it used to be that everybody thought the world was flat. How long ago was that? So that was about 2,400 years ago, meaning up till about the Churban Bayis Rishon. The whole world thought that the world was flat. But then came the Greeks, and they proved it. The world is not flat. Meaning somewhere between the Churban Bayis Rishon and the building of Bayis Sheni, it had been proven without any equivocation that the world is round. So which one is right? Chazal bring both of them. There's certain things that we paskin according to the theory that the world is flat, and there are certain things that we paskin according to the theory that the world is round. And not only that, they both appear on the same page in Psachim. It's not a problem. Why? Because we're not scientists. We're not trying to say. Rather, we're not using science to paskin the halacha. We're using science to explain the halacha. We're using what we're bringing, this example, is the world flat, is it round, to explain something deeper that the Torah is saying. And that's the main thing that's so hard to get, because we read it, we want to read it literally. We want to read that Chazal are telling us the world is round. No. They're telling us a halacha, they're explaining it not through science, and not because science says so, but because science can be used as an example of how to explain the halacha, and the halacha itself comes from somewhere completely different. Yeah.
Can you give an example of that?
Another famous one is the Alter Rebbe, the Paskins, like many Rishonim or Achonei Rishonim, that you can kill a lice on Shabbos because it's not alive. So first of all, right away, what do you mean it's not alive? They see it moving. So Alter Rebbe also saw that it moved. That wasn't the issue. The question was, how is it formed? So the understanding that people usually give is, well, they thought, because that's what science told them at the time, that this is spontaneous generation, that the lice are somehow coming spontaneously out of the, whatever it is, the trash, whatever they're coming out of. Okay? That was the understanding.
How does that mean that it's not alive?
What? Oh, exactly. So why does that not make it alive? Well, because something didn't come out. So it doesn't come out of a mother and a father. That's the thing that we're going to talk about now. Does it mean it's not alive? Of course it's alive. It's animated. I see that it moves. But the halachic definition of what type of life I'm looking for is one that's dependent on something coming out of a pair of creatures, not just out of one. It's very relevant to what we're going to see soon. Meaning, they have to multiply. There's many ways to multiply. Amoebas also multiply. They split. There's even bigger animals than amoebas that split. I don't remember what it's called. So there's
a type of snail.
snails are all asexual. I don't remember how they multiply. But the type of life that's forbidden to kill, for whatever reason, the deep halachic reason, is the type of life that comes from a male and a female, from two creatures together. And this has many, many meanings. For instance, the whole question now about meat. Because meat's going to change in the next 20 years. There's not going to be any meat from animals. All the meat's going to be grown in a factory. So is that meat kosher or not kosher? If you get meat that came from a davar acher, it took cells from a how do you call them? From swine. That's a nicer word than the other one. So you take it from swine and you grow it in a petri dish, and that's how you make the meat. Is it davar acher? Is it something they're not allowed to? It doesn't need. Certainly can't be shochated. It's like a ben pkua. What is it exactly? So all these definitions, they're deep halachic definitions that science only gives you an example of. But again, you you're talking about something much deeper. So when it comes to Medrash, it's even worse. Again, the famous story of Avram sent Eliezer to find a wife for Yitzchak. But the Medrash says, Vashem berachet Avram bakol, that he had a daughter whose name was Bakol. Right? Everybody knows that Medrash because Rashi quotes it. So the famous question is, so if he had a daughter whose name was Bakol, so why did Yitzchak not marry this daughter? You have to send Eliezer to go look. Why do all this? Anybody ever hear the answer?
Didn't he from that family?
What?
Didn't he say it couldn't be from his family?
No, they married. In those generations, it was better. The highest form of marriage really is chesed, as a brother and sister. And all the Shvatim married, they're twins. And so the famous answer is because Yitzchak said, I want a real wife. I don't want a wife from the Medrash. Okay? And people do it double take, and they're like, what? You mean the Medrash? No. The Medrash is not mikra. It's not that it has a pshat. It doesn't necessarily have a pshat. To have a pshat means that this has to have a physical interpretation. In the Medrash, it doesn't have to have it could be that it has, it could be that it doesn't. We don't hold the Medrash to the same standard that we hold the Chumash. The Chumash, that's why the famous question, it says, Vayamot Sham Moshe Eved Hashem. Moshe died there, the servant of Hashem. So what do Chazal right away ask him about Basra? They say, how could Moshe die and write these words? So people think, they do the opposite. They take the Chumash like it's Medrash. What do you mean? He wrote it before. He wrote, Moshe died. No, you don't understand. If it says, Vayamot Sham Moshe, it means that at some level, you have to interpret it in some way physically. So how could Moshe be dead and still write these 8 verses? That's where the question comes from. Because en mikra yotzei midei pshuto means that there's a pshat, there's a physical pshat. If you can figure out a different physical pshat for Vayamot Sham Moshe Eved Hashem, you can figure out a different way to explain it, so that would be great. So settled, then there would be no question. But if this is pshat, there has to be a pshat here. The pshat is somehow he died. So how is he writing? So that's where the famous question comes from. So what's the answer? So Baal Shem Tov gives the deepest answer. But in any case, it's a tremendous question. How can you say somebody died and that they continued to write? That's the difference between Mikra and between Medrash. So Kabbalah is Medrash. Chassidus is Medrash. So it's always symbolizing something. It's always a metaphor for something. And it's up to us to figure out what in the world are they trying to get across. Because they're not trying to get across these words. They're trying to get across an idea. They're using the symbolism to... Okay, so now when we say a circle, Hashem is surrounding all worlds. And we say Hashem is memaleh kol almin, and He's filling all worlds, we don't mean spatially. Why? Because Hashem doesn't take up space. Okay? You can't say about Hashem that He's in space. Hu mekomo shel olam ve'en ha'olam mekomo. He's the space of the world, and the world is not His space. So we want to try to get that out of people's system. So we say He's not space. You can't say, so what do you mean? So what exactly does it mean that He's surrounding everything? So this is the topic of this half of the chapter, half of the first chapter. Okay. So says the Zohar, that He surrounds our worlds and He fills our worlds. Really, what did they mean to say? They meant to say there are 2 manners, 2 ways in which Hashem gives life or sustains creation. Eichadu, the first one is, שמתלבשת הערה ממנו יתברך בתוכיותם ובפנימיותם. בכל אחד כפי מדרגתו. ממלא כל עלמין, the first one, means that Hashem is giving life, how? Through this strange word called enclothement. Mitlabish. He's enclothing Himself inside me. And that also, Hashem doesn't, I'm not clothed. Hashem doesn't wear garments. What are we talking about? So what are we trying to say? We're trying to say that there are different levels in the same way that if I'm a major in the army, I wear a different uniform than if I'm a corporal, a simple soldier. It's different clothing. It's as if it appears in a different way. And most importantly, it integrates, to say here, meaning that I chop it, I understand it. That means that Hashem is giving life. It's a strange thing to think, but think about the fact that you know that 1 + 1 = 2, that is Hashem giving you life. People don't think about it this way, but that's exactly what it means. The very fact that my mind at this moment can understand something, anything, that is Hashem's light called Memaleh Kol Almin, or his revelation of Memaleh Kol Almin, giving life to my mind. Every page of Shas that I understand, every word that I understand, this is all Hashem. We look for Hashem. Where's Hashem? Where's Hashem? What do you mean, where's Hashem? First of all, he's what you understand. That's called his aspect called Memaleh Kol Almin. So a person wants to connect to Hashem. He says, I don't know how do you connect? How do you find Hashem? Where do you find Hashem? He says, open up any page of anything and try to understand what it says. And if you chop it, that's Hashem. Hashem is now revealing himself to you. That's why it's so important for me to learn Dafka Chumash or Torah or whatever it is that's holy, and not to learn something else. Why? Because in something else he's also revealing himself to me, but it's not a mitzvah. So, as we know, when it's a mitzvah, it's also infinite. And infinite means that not only is he in me, he's also around me. That's the way it's described. But really, what do we mean to say? We'll see in a moment. We'll see what it means in a moment.
So is it giving himself to me via the knowledge that I'm obtaining or the process of contemplation?
When I contain it in my head. And therefore, that's why there's a minimum that you have to know by heart.
But then what if you don't understand it? If you're not
Okay.
talking, he's not revealing?
So it depends. There are certain areas in which you have to chop, you have to understand. There are certain areas where you don't have to chop. You have to at least at some level be able to discern what the words are, even if you don't understand what they mean. But you have to have some connection with the words. That's the difference between Mikra and between Torah Sheba'al Peh.
How do you check to know which one is which?
You read the Hilchos Talmud Torah of the
No,
Alter
but
Rebbe.
like you have to be able to tell something's happening. Like if you're having that kind of experience,
If
you
you
should be able
understand.
to tell. It's if you understand.
Okay.
So then what's the circumstance that, like with Torah Sheba'al Peh, it's easy. If you understand it and then you can experience the change that you are having inside yourself. But if it's Torah Sheba'al and what is the chopping that you're supposed to chop? Is it that I know that I'm experiencing Torah Sheba'al?
It's the actual looking at the letters. It's the actual reading of the letters. That's all it needs. You don't have to understand.
And what's the change that takes place when I'm doing that?
It's not a change. That's why you don't have to know it by heart.
Okay.
It's a very important thing. If you look in the regular Shulchan Aruch, in Hilchos Talmud Torah, there's one thing that's missing there. It strikes you very strongly if you look at it. You see that he never covers what you need to know. He only tells you how to learn, how many hours a day, how to divide your time, to take money, not to take money. All these things he covers very nicely. But one thing he never gets into, the question of what do you need to know to perform the mitzvah of Vishinantam. Vishinantam means you should know by heart, so that if somebody asks you, you know the answer right away.
Not only that, what's also missing from the whole Marechet, also Kibud Tamid Chacham, Kibud Ava'em, all surrounding that same area of Hilchot Talmud Torah, is also lacking an expression of what is a Tamid Chacham exactly.
Okay. Right.
There's no.
Right. So,
It doesn't even say Tamid Chacham is somebody who knows all of this or who behaves like such and such and such.
Right.
It also doesn't show.
So what happened? My guess is they didn't have a good definition. There was no good definition until the Alter Rebbe came along. So what did the Alter Rebbe? The Alter Rebbe suddenly had a definition. And he says, if you understand that the purpose of something is to be understood, to be mamale, that you know it, that it changes you. that you now chap it. So I can tell you what you need to know. But before you define Torah in that way, and the only thing you have is the mitzvah of Torah, but not how the Torah affects you, that's the memale, so you couldn't define it. And it's amazing, there's no definition before the Alter Rebbe, as far as I'm aware. Nobody defined it. So when he defines it, it's very easy. So what do you need to know? You need to know Halacha Psuka B'Ta'ameh up to the Geonim. That's period. That's what you need to know. It's not so much. That's why he wrote his Shulchan Aruch the way he wrote it, Halacha Psuka B'Ta'ameh, because his shita was that you had to know the tam, you had to know you had to understand. How did they get from the pasuk to this halacha? That's like his understanding. But that changes you because you understand. Because now you understand the words. And Torah Shabbat Peh means that you took the words from the Chumash and you understood them in such and such a way. And somebody asked this question, asked that question, but in the end, this is the understanding, and that's how the halacha came out.
So can't you say that all of science and all of any sort of
Is also an understanding
construct,
right, but it's not a mitzvah.
That provides a vernacular or a jargon
If it
in
helps
order
you.
to help us. No,
if it does.
If it does, and if it doesn't.
So my argument is that it doesn't, because really it's just an illustration. It's just an example. I'm just using it to help people understand. But if
you need that in order to.
So the Rebbe has a very important mimer that he gives 6 levels of how something becomes part of Torah, even though it's science. So the highest level is like when you calculate the calendar, or you calculate when the
teach somebody to observe by themselves.
So that they can do the calculations by themselves, and that mathematics becomes a part of the mitzvah, and it's like math becomes part of your understanding.
Isn't that like the sheet of Rabbi Soloveitchik also?
I don't know.
The idea of
Maybe.
Torah
Torah Mada is not from Rabbi Soloveitchik, it's from Norman Lamb. But I don't know if he...
Mada. Like
the
the
famous
idea
book.
that somebody like Rabbi Soloveitchik would
He tried.
facilitate a
They
universal.
tried to get to that. But they're very distant from it. When Nachum Lamb wrote his book Torah Mada,
Right.
so he offered Chassidus as one option, and he goes to a certain level of understanding, but it's not the full understanding of the Alter Rebbe.
Mm-hmm.
He stops short. It's a point worthy of being brought up. And okay,
Can I ask one question?
yeah.
I want to make sure I understand it. It sounds like the understanding is the finite, though, even though
Huh?
it's the high, and then the mitzvah
Mm-hmm.
is
The infinite,
the infinite.
right?
But there's this correlation between understanding the mitzvah, that when you're combining the two, it's like when you take the mitzvah, you're doing it, which is infinite, but then that understanding, that level is there, which is kind of infusing the infinite. But
They're together,
they have to be together.
but the
right?
mitzvah is not the understanding.
Right.
The mitzvah is the actual performance of the mitzvah,
And it's without that.
and that has and the famous thing is, so many of our mitzvahs are spoken. Okay, we speak them. So says the Alter Rebbe, nobody knows how to speak. Nobody knows how. I mean, there's a תקשורת, speech therapist. So a speech therapist tries to, if somebody has a speech impediment, tries to reteach them how to actually speak, but really you can't do it. Because in the end, nobody knows how they speak. That's a famous thing in the Taina that he brings. That somehow, when the nefesh comes into the body, it just knows how to speak. And as much as we've analyzed and tried to figure it out, and then we don't know, again, we know what happens. We know how the vocal cords are muscles that they contract. We know the physical process. But nobody thinks of this when they actually speak.
Is that like we were talking about people focusing on what talents that they have?
Right. If you
Focus on what you're good at, because that's what
right.
Okay.
It's natural for you. Those things. So in any case, going back to speech, I can't teach you how to do the mitzvah. It's almost like I can't even teach you how to raise your arm. I can't even teach you how to. If somebody can't shake the lulav, I don't know how to teach him.
So the understanding is a disadvantage. I mean, in some ways, like
In
animals,
some ways,
animals are just acting. They're not trying to understand.
Right.
That's not what we're about. We don't see that as
It's one aspect. So that's why the Baal Shem Tov loved simple Yidden. Why? Because when he does a mitzvah, he only does it because Hashem said to do so. There's no understanding of why this might, and in the end we're the same way. As much as I might know many ta'amim, many reasons for a mitzvah, I never say that I know the tam. I never say that I know the full absolute reason. Because ta'amei Torah, ta'amei mitzvot lo nitgalu. We don't know the reasons behind the mitzvah. That's what we mean, the rechava mitzvot chamon, the infinite is revealed here. That as much as I would be able to fathom in all the gilgulim and all my levels of going up in Shemaim, it's still not what Hashem had in mind.
That's part of those people who think they mamash know the reason of the mitzvah are not doing the mitzvah.
Oh. Sometimes it works the opposite, right? That the more you know, or the more you think you know how it came about, the less committed you are. Again, this goes back to the idea that the point of the mitzvah is to go beyond your understanding. In this case, we would say ignorance is active. It's blissful in the sense that it doesn't get in your way, but it leads. It's not ignorance in the sense that we don't want to know. As much as I can learn, dafka I want to learn, but when I come to actually do it, I do it like a simple yid. That was the main thing. Just kabbalas all. That's the main thing in the mitzvah. And that's what he's trying to say, because the mitzvah is supposed to reveal the infinite. And if it's really infinite, I cannot fathom it. It doesn't matter how many levels up I go. I'll never reach it. And in the end, Moshe Rabbeinu and I are the same when it comes to putting tefillin on. It's just the same. Okay. So that's the sovev. Here we're talking about the memala. Memala is how much I understand, how much I fathom, how much I grasp. And each person is privileged to understand the different level. And that's what we said, that there are levels, there are finite levels in the memale, in the kav, in the line. And there's only so much that you can understand. By the way, one of the most beautiful things to do, and the Rebbe always tried to do this, I think, is to take a person to the level where they fall apart. Meaning, if you have a person who's a genius in that's what the Baal Shem Tov did to people. That they would come to him with all their theories about Torah, and he in one moment made them forget everything. Why? Because he confused them so much. Because there's so much depth upon depth upon depth that if you find somebody who can give you all that depth, you break apart. You can't bear it anymore, and so you just become simple. And that's what he wanted from people. He wanted from people to understand. As much as you understand, there's a level beyond understanding, and I want you to connect to that level. I think that today, in the modern world, this is a really big deal. This mamish is a lifesaver for so many people, because people are so confused by so many theories that are out there. It's a relief to know that there's something simple that you can hold on to. And it's not only that there's something simple to hold on to, it's the ikr. That's what Hashem wanted. So as much as you perceive, we're very smart. To say that we don't know today is not true. We know a great deal. And even the science that we have today, I mean, it's not crazy to say that it touches the truth in many, many ways. And yet that's not what Hashem is looking for in the performance of the mitzvah. But Gamizel Tanach Yadcha, you need to learn. You have the memale, and you also have the soviv. דהיינו כמאמר רז"ל, מה הנשמה ממלאה את הגוף, אף הקדוש ברוך הוא ממלא את כל העולם. In the same way that the neshama fills the body, so the Eibishter, he fills the world. So the neshama fills the body. Anybody know where the neshama is in the body? Where?
In the brain.
Yeah, so where you feel it. What about here? You don't feel it here?
I feel it.
No, you can feel it in the heart.
Okay, you feel it in the heart. This is a very interesting exercise you can do. Ask somebody to point at themselves. Right? So it's very interesting. Most people will still point here. Very few people point here. Even though I think most people feel that they're here more than they're here. Mm-hmm. Why did you say brain? Because we know there's a basic idea that why do we say the feelings are here?
Because the thoughts are here. And thoughts and feelings are different.
Okay, but why do we put them here? Why don't we say the feelings are here? Or here?
It's not what they feel like they are.
Why?
It's just the way they feel.
Okay. So who's feeling? Who's telling us that the feeling is here and it's not here?
The brain is telling us.
Right.
It's still separate.
It's projecting. So the brain is a beautiful example of what we mean by a small map of the entire neshama. That's why a lot of times we say that the neshama starts from the brain, because really the mind has like a map of the whole body, and it tells us where we feel certain things.
But doesn't the heart have to be pumping the power of the brain? So it's a chicken and the egg. How can this start without this?
But there's no thought or feeling going on in the heart. It's just a pump. And the same thing that we talk as another example of kidneys being yuatzot, the kidneys giving advice. We're going to talk about the kidneys a little bit as we go on. So has anybody ever gotten advice from their kidneys? Apart from the fact that you shouldn't drink when you're drinking. It's not, what kind of advice can you?
Life lessons after.
Okay. So what does it mean that they're even called that? They're called Eitzah. That's their name. Klayot yoatzot. Eitzah is even a name of a kidney in Hebrew. So why is this? Why are they? Because there's a certain type, and this is granted that many people don't have this experience anymore, but there's a certain type of thought that you feel is here. If you don't feel the thought projecting here, you don't yet know what it means to give advice the way the Chazal meant it. Meaning, if you feel love here, you know what love is. So we have the same experience, we know what we're talking about. But they talked about the fact that there's a way to know something. Of course it comes from here, but the projection, the feeling is here. And the question is, what is that? How many, so have you ever felt anything at all here? Stress. Okay. So this just means how disconnected we are. But this area, the whole belt around the loins, is a place that has, I'll say it in a different way. And Shlomo Karlebach used to say, how do I know that I really want to go somewhere? You ever heard this from? Because my feet carry me there. What do you mean your feet carry you there? You decide you want to go. What do you mean? No, there's a feeling. There's mamish a feeling that you have in your feet. It's different. It's not like the feeling you have in your hand. You have to be.
Even more so if you don't want to go somewhere.
And all the more so, I'm planted. I'm not going anywhere.
You're not going.
Okay?
You're not going.
You feel it. You can feel if your feet are light. Your feet are light, and they want to go somewhere, or they don't want to go somewhere. We're not so accustomed to this, but it's how you're sitting. How you're sitting actually is a feeling in your loins. It's how, when I give advice, I can tell from the way I'm sitting, the way I carry myself, the way I'm planted with my body, whether this is good advice or not. It's a feeling that's here. And you feel power. There's a certain type of power that you feel there. So somebody would say this is all imagination. So, okay. So, the heart feeling is also entirely imagination, because there's nothing feeling here. It's all a projection from the mind. But when this happens the right way, this is where you'll experience it. And the whole body is mapped in that way into the mind. And so we're not very sensitive to many of these things anymore, even though we know about them. And at least it's not so hard to show somebody that when they're sitting a certain way, they feel a certain way about themselves. It's not so difficult. People do that. There's a lot of, it's becoming more popular now with a lot of body language to try to understand what the person is speaking, but it's a way of expressing ourselves. But it's also a way of seeing ourselves. That they don't do so much. They more tell you, you need to project, because it's all about what you tell others. Like it's a political thing, or whatever they use it for. But really, if you're very sensitive, then you can use body language to understand yourself. And you mamish understand when things are going in a certain direction and when not. Okay. So anyway, what time is it? 27. Wow. Okay. So where is so what does it mean that the neshama is inside the body? So the neshama is a thing. What do you mean it's inside the body? Using the word inside, mimalet guf. So, there's this thing that everybody gets caught up on. Well, if the neshama is in the body, then when a person passes away, it must leave, right? So if it's a thing, so just weigh them before and after. So what's the difference? Right? It's at least the breath. I don't know. What is it? So what do they find?
Some how many grams or something.
27 grams, right? Remember? That's the number that they come sign. The Rebbe's favorite number. 27, 3 to 30. I think that's the number that they associate with it. What's the problem with that? The neshama is not a thing. The neshama doesn't fill the body in a sense that something fills something else. It's not like drink inside a cup. It doesn't change the weight of the body. It's not something. In the same way that the electricity inside this lamp doesn't change the weight of the lamp. It only causes the lamp to act differently. But it doesn't change it. There's no something new there. It's the same ingredients that were there before, the same ingredients that there are now. But just when I turn on the electricity, suddenly the lamp acts in a different way. So when I say the neshama is inside the body, I don't mean something entered into the body. Because it didn't enter and did not enter. What I'm trying to say is that the neshama is affecting the body in the same way that if a person, take a 2-year-old, who doesn't understand what a street and cars are, and look at their behavior, and take an adult who understands the difference between the sidewalk and the street and what cars mean, and look at their behavior. It's the same body. It didn't change. It's the same thing. One understands and one doesn't. The moment that I have understanding, the moment that I have neshama inside, that one of the things that's so hard to get across is if you don't learn, there's no neshama inside. There's simply no neshama. You can't have neshama if you don't learn, if you don't understand. Understand something.
Could you use a different word than understand, though? Forgive me, because from a science background, because understanding is like a certain kind of computational, like a computer can understand it at a certain level, because it can process and make decisions like an AI can do it. But could it be? I'm just looking for myself, like awareness at a certain point. Like one of my teachers used to say that to learn is to see the same thing with new eyes. That a computer can't really do that. That like the difference between a kid looking at something, like the owning of a kid is like cookies and cakes and something like that, and that there's like a categorical deluge that's different when an adult's looking at the same thing.
So we can use different words that may fit.
I just want to make sure that I'm not getting it the way that
it means that somehow my behavior is now different, for whatever the reason. That I understand the world in a different way. So if you want to call it that I see the same thing in a different way, the child and the adult see the same street. And yet it means one thing for the child, it means one thing, another thing.
What about someone that knows and then does the same mistake? You understand, but then you still do it. So your behavior is not actually different.
No, it means you have a neshama. And unfortunately, you also have cravings.
Yeah.
And the cravings overtake you. So how wise is that? It means that we're not that simple. We have a few different forces working here.
When I sent out the announcement of the class, I said 39:45. So just.
So I should understand that and act accordingly.
I'm just speaking. So let's see how that changes things.
So putting that out, so let's just get through this point because it's a very important point. That there is no neshama without. You can't say that I have a neshama inside me if it has no. If you can't describe it as some change that occurred in your thinking.
How can you say, if you don't say your neshama is inside you, then you have to say your neshama is not inside you?
Okay, some of it is not inside me, meaning it doesn't affect my behavior. It doesn't affect how I see the world.
It doesn't have to be inside you to not affect your behavior.
Right. What we're saying is that inside and outside is not spatial.
Right.
It's rather, we're not, it's consciousness. It's whether you're conscious of it or not. So in a certain sense, the neshama already knows all the Torah. It's very nice for the neshama. But for me here, If that's not entering inside in the sense that it's not affecting me, it's as if I'm not with all my parts. And part of my neshama is outside, as it were. Yeah.
Seems like it almost sounds like it comes and goes.
Yes, yes. When we go to sleep, what do we say?
I didn't mean
What do
it's sleep, but I
But
meant
that's
that
the
the
strongest
person that's
example.
spending their day, now they've learned and they're learning.
But that's exactly when we wake up. We say, "Shechazalta bi nishmati." When I was asleep, I cannot access. At least most people cannot access their entire neshama. Some people can, but that's a special quality, a special skill. But most of us feel that our neshama came back. That's what it means. It's exactly that. When it came back, it wasn't here. Of course, it was here, but it wasn't accessible. It wasn't affecting my behavior. I was asleep. I'm sorry if I.
You're physically awake, but you're not being mindful.
No.
So is it still here?
Hashem
Or is it
elochem.
in the same way that you're sleeping?
You're less. You're less than you could be. That's why to have your wits about you all the time is such a. That's why we sometimes can't understand why would they do this. The Mujitzer, when he had his leg amputated, so this was in 1925 in Berlin. They had anesthesia. There was a way to lessen the pain considerably, and he wouldn't take it under any circumstances. He says, "No way." Why? Because you want me to give up a moment of my neshama being in this world? When a person reaches that level, for him, that's also why sleep bothers him, unless he knows how to not sleep. There's people who knows how. I said it's a skill that you can acquire, that you continue to work as you sleep, and you continue to do things. But for most people, it's why would I waste this precious moment that I have of the neshama being here? And it's a completely different take on what life is about, because if I want the neshama to be here, every moment that I can do think of another pshat, another something, that's exactly what it means, the neshama in the body. And I'm doing a mitzvah if I'm learning, for instance, and that mitzvah is exactly the revelation of the Ein Sof. Because I'm doing it as a mitzvah, not just the part where I understand or don't understand, but it's the fact that I'm performing Hashem's will.
Is that realistic though? Is that really how and why we do mitzvot?
Should be, I think. I know,
Without a level of understanding?
the Rebbe spent 40 years pumping it again and again in the Kabbalah soul, Kabbalah soul, Kabbalah soul, Kabbalah soul, without end.
And how does that relate to what we were talking about earlier with this idea of using science and our environment as a way of interpretation, knowing that it's going to change?
But this is what I have in my generation. The strongest example that's always bothered me was, until I learned this, was why in the world is the Tanakh so political? Yirmiyahu had nothing to... This is a guy who, I don't know how to call him a guy, he's a Navi who sees everything, and what he has to tell me about is why Aram is going to hit Egypt with this and that. What? What do I care? Why is this relevant to me today? I think that the only serious answer is that he was speaking to people in the language that they understood, using the parables, the metaphors that they were... Again, if today the biggest chacham would come, so unfortunately, the only way you could make the news is if you would say something political. That's how it is, because that's the language that regular people speak. If you would say something scientific, no. He'd make the end of the newscast. But if you want to open the newscast, you want to say something that has... And he's not telling us this to tell us, this is what's going to happen because I have to prove to you. The Rambam writes in the commentary in the Mishnah, in his introduction to the Mishnah to Zraim, that's not what prophecy. Prophecy is not about telling you the future. A prophet is a prophet because he's a prophet. How does he become a prophet? Either he has some other prophet say that he's a prophet, or that in the past he was able to say something, but now he's a prophet not because of that, because he knows how to give us good advice. That's why. Not because he knows the future, but because he knows how to give us good advice, telling us, do this, it'll work out. Not because he's looking at the future, because he's looking at the person and saying, so how do you tell what's the most important thing people want to know about? So tell us, should we do this with the Egyptians, do this with the Jordanians? You know how to solve those problems. That's always how do the Haredim say it. They used to say this about Rav Elyashiv. They used to say, give Rav Elyashiv the state of Israel for 2 weeks, you'll see that he'll solve all the problems. What are you trying to say? What, that's what interests him? That's his problem, whether you do politically this or you do politically that. No, but that's the language that people speak. So I have to speak the language that people speak. Unless you're a chassid. The Alter Rebbe can write in language nobody understands. Why? Because he knows that we've already advanced enough that we're willing to, we've learned our lesson, and we know that he doesn't mean literally what he's saying. He's trying to get a point across, and we'll figure it out. We'll try to figure it out. So, okay, so I guess we'll end here.